I always recommend for vegans not to internalize carnism. Even for those of us who have stepped outside of the system, we're still living inside of the system. And one of the ways that dominant ideologies or dominant systems like carnism maintain themselves is by promoting negative messages about the people and the movements that challenge them, right? If we shoot the messenger, we don't have to take seriously the implications of their message. And often vegans can internalize these negative messages. So, for instance, have you ever been called overly emotional? Right? Because this is what happens to proponents, has happened to proponents of all social movements, feminists, people working in civil rights, overly emotional. When it comes to the atrocity of the animals, the world needs more emotion, not less. When we are called overly emotional, this is a way of discrediting our argument, because it means if you're too emotional, what does that mean? You are not rational, right? It's a way of silencing. It's not true. If you feel the emotions of anger and sadness and grief at what's happening to the animals in the world, those emotions are normal, healthful, legitimate, and appropriate. This is what the numb carnistic culture looks at as overly emotional, only in comparison with an under-emotional dominant culture. Often we're token. To be a token something means to be that you become the representative for the entire group, right? So, like, how many of you, as the vegan, you feel like you always are representing veganism, so you have to represent it well, right? I'll pretend I never get sick, because if they know I get sick, then they're going to say it's because you're vegan, and it's going to have a negative impact on the movement. So we become the token ambassadors. That's a lot of stress to carry. Often we become tokenized. Guys, we're called picky. Oh, you're such a picky eater, you know? You won't just pick out the meatballs and eat the pasta sauce. We've already talked about this. You can say, no, I'm having a disgust response. It's a legitimate psychological reaction. A psychologist told me so. We are hypocrites if we wear leather, extremists if we don't. If we express our anger about what's happening to the animals, then we're militant human haters. If instead we don't talk from anger, but we talk from wanting peace and compassion, then we are eater, tree-hugging, tofu-loving hippies. And to proselytize, propagandize might be, to promote propaganda, right? It's similar. So when vegans share information about the benefits of eating a vegan diet, we can be called sharing propaganda. When meat eaters share information about, nutrients in eating animals, that's not propaganda, that's just information, right? So recognizing these, it is essential to not internalizing, not believing them. Because holding on to our truth, the dominant culture tries to make us question our own truth. Hold on to your truth. Believing and living your truth is the greatest threat to powers that be. So one issue that I like to mention, and I'm just going to mention this very briefly, is to recognize STSD. This is called secondary traumatic stress disorder. How many of you have heard of PTSD? Post-traumatic stress disorder? That translates, right? So like combat veterans have this. STSD is the same in many ways as PTSD, but it's what happens to people who are witnesses to violence, not the direct victims of violence. Many of us who are fighting atrocities, who are working to raise awareness of atrocities, can become traumatized by them. And can feel, maybe you have felt this, can feel burnout, can feel like a loss of faith in humanity, a loss of faith in the world, in the universe. This happens sometimes when we over-witness, when we see too much. I have so many vegans tell me, I watched Earthlings again. Again? What? Well, because I wanted my friends to see it, and I felt like if the animals are suffering so much, then for me to spend 20 minutes or 1 hour of my life, that's nothing compared to the animals. Except that this person is, of course, traumatized. And the more we witness, we don't need to witness. When you already know what's happening, you don't need to see over and over and over again the images, because they can have a negative impact over time. Maybe you have experienced it. You can't get the images out of your mind. They come to your mind when you don't want them to. Don't over-witness, and get witnessed. Find people who you can talk to. Maybe you don't share the graphic details, but who see you. To be witnessed is to be seen. When we live in a dominant carnistic culture that turns away from veganism, then we as vegans can feel invisible too. We can feel invisible in very profound ways. So it's so important to find people who see who you are and what you do and validate that, so the culture doesn't minimize or dismiss you in that way. This book, by the way, Trauma Stewardship, is an excellent, excellent book, a practical book for taking care of ourselves. All right, we'll wrap up. We've got 2 more. Okay, appreciate your burden of knowing and expect that others won't. People in your life cannot see who you are until they're ready to see the truth about carnism. 2 more quick points. Don't let carnistic culture minimize your impact or dismiss your beliefs or efforts. Often vegans will say that the problem is still so big, even though we've been working so hard. Well, remember, the problem would be even bigger. You are the only thing that is standing between animals and a worse situation for them. There is reason to hope. In the United States, the number of vegans and vegetarians has doubled in the past 3 years. We've got articles coming out about veganism, leaders, celebrities saying no to veganism. Ellen has her own website about veganism. The culture, the vegan culture, is just exploding everywhere. It is expanding exponentially, and one way carnism maintains itself is by making it seem like veganism is not nearly as powerful or growing as much as it is, but it is. And my very last point is to find out what inspires you. Remember that you're part of something that's greater than your individual self. You're part of a social movement that, in my belief, is going to be looked back upon one day as one of the most important and influential and transformational revolutions in the history of humankind, and you're a part of that. Remember that you're not alone, and find out what inspires you. What inspires me is meeting you, is talking to people and witnessing what you do, and being reminded of how important this work really is and how many people are really active in this work. So I want to wrap up by just saying to you, thank you for all that you are and for all that you do. You are the reason that the world is a better place for animals, and you are the reason that I can continue to do what I do. You recharge my vegan batteries, and you inspire me, and you make me want to be a better activist and a better person. So thank you. Thank you for coming.